Take your mind into the wonderful world of physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual wellness. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kinetic Hour. Conversations with you and guests. With your host, Kennon, Wesley, Mason. That's me.
Well, I think it's the role of parents to pay close attention to their kids. And it's not the job of government to act as a parent to kids who might get into trouble. I think it's perfectly legitimate for government to deliver accurate messages about drug use. Mm-hmm. But one of the things we see happening with anti-drug use messages is that too often they're simply not accurate. I mean, look at it with cigarette smoking or even marijuana smoking, for example. Most people who use marijuana don't get into trouble. It doesn't lead to heroin use, and yet it's called a gateway drug.
Right.
But kids see that what they're being told is a lie. So as a result, they don't believe anything. And yes, you can hurt yourself with drugs. You certainly can. Yeah. But if an authority is telling kids and others false information, that's creating a problem in the name of a solution. And I think the government and state is the real problem here.
Yeah.
Kids, and look at this from another point of view, Kennon. We live in a drug culture. Yeah. Drugs are us. We are advocating good drugs and trying to discourage people from using bad drugs. But there is no good or bad drug. It all depends on how you use it, right?
Yeah.
Even if you want to, I mean, is a poison a bad drug? Well, not if you want to commit suicide and you have cancer or you have good reason to end your life. Then certain drugs may be very effective at doing that. I'm not advocating suicide, but there obviously are times when people want to do that. Yeah. And the drug, taking an overdose of some drug may be the most effective way of doing that. The drug is not inherently evil or good. And what's happened also, I mean, we have now in Maryland legalized marijuana.
Okay.
1 mile from my house, there's a medical dispensary, and you can get recreational marijuana very, very easily. Now, prior to this, marijuana was considered what we call a panapathogen. In other words, it caused harm everywhere, right?
All right.
Everything was blamed on marijuana.
Yep.
Now there's a flip. Now marijuana is considered a panacea. In other words, it will cure whatever ails you, right?
Yes,
so you have hemp clothes, hemp ice cream.
Right.
Marijuana will cure diarrhea. It'll cure a bad cough. I mean, and it's, I mean, if you want to do that, fine, but I don't believe that it will cure all the things that people claim that it does.
Yeah.
It's just as inaccurate as saying that it will cause harm everywhere. It's not the great panacea that people like to think of it as. Yeah. But these are the messages that are particularly appealing to people when times are rough. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why during the pandemic, it was a very scary time. I mean, thousands and thousands of people died. And then you had all this complication where people said they weren't dying. This was a conspiracy that was bullshit. Yeah. I mean, it's enough to make you want to take drugs because it's so confusing.
Yes, that's right.
And the fact of the matter is, fentanyl is a very useful drug. It all depends on why you want to use it and how you use it. I have a history of a serious back problem. And when I was having cataract surgery, I had to lay on a table, and my back was just killing me. while I was on the table. And they give you an anesthetic while they're cutting out your lens and doing all of this. And I said, I can't take laying on my back. It's just killing me.
Yeah.
He said, do you want some fentanyl? And I said, well, yeah, if you think that's going to help my back. Well, they just added a little bit of fentanyl into the anesthesia that was going into my vein, and my back pain disappeared. I had no craving for the drug afterwards. It was very useful when used appropriately.
Right.
But now fentanyl is considered the evil drug that takes over people's lives. Again, drugs are neither good nor bad, safe nor dangerous. It all depends on how you use it. And that's true for fentanyl too. And I've known people that have overdosed on fentanyl that was laced into heroin. And I would be very cautious about using drugs on the street. And that's a good argument for legalized drugs that have been deemed safe for public consumption. I had some students that would come and talk to me, and they were using too much oxycodone, or what's the other one, Percocet. And I said, well, where are you getting all of this? And they said, I get it on the internet. It comes from Mexico. I said, are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
How do you know that stuff is okay?
Yeah.
He said, I don't. And I said, well, that's dangerous there, because it could be laced with fentanyl. It could be laced with strychnine. Who the hell knows?
Wow. Strychnine.
You can die from it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good argument for the legalization of drugs, or for the repeal of drug prohibition, because it can ensure safety of the product. But people will still be reckless. It's like alcohol is legally available, but how many deaths are there associated with excessive drinking?
Yeah. It hasn't gone, the numbers haven't gone down.
Right.
Right. We still, even in a Uber and Lyft era, we still have people that are getting into car accidents due to drunk driving.
Right.
And I think there's really no excuse for anyone to get into any drunk driving car accident when we have access to these other means of transportation.
Exactly.
I think it's really, again, it's about, would you say, the eye of the beholder, to where the drug is going to be effective for the individual or not.
Right.
Or not. So children really need to be careful with the drugs, all drugs, if you will, because actually one of my clients was using Percocet, and I was like, where are you getting it from? Right. It's like, oh, I get it out on the street. I know people.
Right.
I know someone.
Right.
That's how easy it is for drugs, or what we would call legal drugs. This is how simple it is to get access.
Right.
Access to these drugs that you would otherwise have to have a prescription for.
Right.
It's so simple.
It is.
I was telling you yesterday about this drug that's causing a big stir now. It's called Ozempic. It's a diabetic drug for diabetes, and more people are using it for strictly weight loss.
Right.
And now more and more people are having complications. And one lady said that she's had her entire stomach started to go into like a paralysis, where it wasn't functioning anymore.
Wow.
I
don't know about that. You know more about that than I do. But I know that people have been abusing Ozempic to lose weight. And it was originally prescribed for diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
But
and more people are using it strictly for the effect of weight loss, without really knowing what the real consequences will be physiologically, and possibly psychologically.
There you go. Right.
Because they can become addicted to it. Right.
And why do they want to lose weight? Well, they want to lose weight for psychological reasons. They want to be more attractive.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's right. more attractive, and also well, I guess, yeah, more attractive would be the number one reason for weight loss. It's because of their aesthetic appearance. They want to be aesthetically attractive.
And depending on the culture, being overweight might be very attractive in certain cultures.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the South Pacific, I believe, being overweight in some tribes is considered a sign of beauty.
Yes. Yes,
right?
it is.
But you and I were talking yesterday about double messages. And there's Gregory Bateson, who was married to Margaret Mead, developed something called the double bind theory of schizophrenia. And what he asserted was that when parents give double messages or contradictory messages, it screws people up. Mm-hmm. It confuses them. Yeah. For example, imagine a parent saying, "I'm beating you physically because I love you."
Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
What is that? Wait a minute, that doesn't compute right with most people. Yes. But it's as if their mind short circuits at that point.
Yep.
But I've been saying that government has been causing similar problems. For example, look at the anti-smoking campaign. The message from government and the anti-tobacco people, and I'm not advocating smoking at all. I don't smoke, and I don't think it's a good idea at all. But the message that's being delivered is that once you get addicted, you can't control your behavior. So you better stop. So how can you stop if you can't control your behavior? You know, on the one hand, they say you can't control your behavior. On the other hand, they say you better control your behavior. Well, which one is it?
Which one is it? Right. Right.
And then they say as evidence, which isn't evidence at all, they show people who smoke themselves to death. And they say, I can't stop, and I'm dying of emphysema or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or cancer, et cetera, et cetera. If I could stop, why would I keep smoking? Well, I don't know why you keep smoking. It seems like a stupid idea to me, but I think you can control yourself.
Yeah.
You know, that's like some people have claimed that a rapist is addicted. This was in the Washington Post like 40 years ago. There were treatment professionals who said rapists and sex addicts are addicted to the chemicals released in their brain during orgasm, and they can't control their behavior. Wow. Well, that's just absolute nonsense.
Wow.
Right? Absolute nonsense.
Okay.
People can always control their behavior when it's important enough. And that's the message that parents should be giving to their kids. Resist temptation. Delay gratification. You and I were talking about the importance of teaching kids to delay gratification.
Gratification, yes, that's a big one.
In our society, and you know, Alvin Toffler wrote a book called Future Shock many years ago, and he predicted that this culture of instant gratification was developing at a very intense rate and was influencing almost every part of our lives. And that erodes the whole importance of resisting temptation. Just because you want something doesn't mean you have to have it. And a good parent is going to teach their kid to wait.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big one. It's a big one. And I'm teaching my daughter, as I told you, a little more patience, you know, right. Patience. It will take you a lot further.
Exactly.
It'll take you a lot further. The delayed gratification, the appreciation,
right.
The earning of your way through life.
Exactly.
Versus everything being handed to you on the silver platter, right. With no learning experience.
Right.
You know, before we wrap, go ahead.
What gets me is that we're teaching people, kids, adults, that they're weak and helpless instead of teaching them that they're strong.
Right.
You know, if the loss of control theory and saying you can't control your behavior if you're drinking too much teaches a helplessness that is inaccurate, because people quit all the time. They always have, and they always will, when it's important enough for them to quit.
Yeah.
And that takes, it's not a matter of a weak will. It's a matter of what I've termed an iron will. Why do people keep using? They have a very strong will that they use to try to gratify whatever desire they have.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
they may get themselves into deep trouble as a result. But that's not, when we say that this is a issue concerning free will, we're not saying that the person has a weak will. We're saying that they have a very strong will. It's just misdirected. And they need to transfer their attachment to drugs to something more constructive.
Go ahead.
No, well, one of the ways is through sports, which is why I've always advocated people use sports to develop strength, inner strength. And, you know, I've studied martial arts for many, many years. And in many Asian cultures, it's part of elementary school education.
Yeah.
They're in Taekwondo, Kendo, Iaido, Kung Fu, whatever it is, because it develops discipline and it develops strength of will. I was just talking to the man who runs the dry cleaners just down the road. And he said that he learned Taekwondo in Korea as a young boy, and it was tremendously important for him. And I said, I agree with that. I think that teaching your kids or having them go to martial arts classes is a very good thing. Yeah. And it develops the strong will that I think is very important for survival in this culture. And that's an important part of sports. I mean, most people involved in sports have known that for a long time. You don't want to tell people they can't do something. You want to teach them that they can do something.
Correct.
And that's what you and I were talking about, Albert Bandura. That's a concept known as self-efficacy. Do you have the power to do what you want to do? We don't want to say you're going to lose that power because you're addicted. We want to teach them that they have the power to do what they want to do. And hopefully that will be in constructive ways.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to segue to, some solutions, which you just gave a few, versus the endless, well, what appears like the endless drug pushing that we see on television every single day, 24 hours a day.
Right.
That the notion is that something is psychologically or physiologically wrong with all of us.
Right.
What are some solutions that, or some more solutions, if you have any more, versus the notion that the magic pill will take care of everything?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I'll tell you some. Obviously, 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous, those types of things are valuable to many people. Unfortunately, a lot of times they teach things that are simply not true about behavior. What I think is very good about 12-step programs is the sense of community that is established. Okay. In other words, you feel like you have a group of people that you can rely on for support. And that is something that ends up being missing when people are disillusioned with religion. And a lot of people have left their religious upbringing because they said there's too much hypocrisy there. I can't stand it. And they're right from my point of view. But leaving the church or the synagogue or whatever it is not necessarily the answer. The answer is finding something that is positive, that is a constructive experience of community, the way that AA can provide for people. So I think that can be done through sports. It can be done through hobbies, any kind of organization where people are committed to doing something and supporting one another in that process. So some sense of community is probably the best insurance against getting in trouble with drugs. I think sports, I always encourage parents to make sure their kids are doing sports in school. It doesn't matter which one.
Yeah.
What matters is your kid going to enjoy and find meaning in the sport, whether it's tennis, martial arts, soccer. My granddaughters are big into crew now. I never knew that much about crew, but boy, are they gung-ho. Yeah. And I'll tell you, they could not do crew if they were smoking pot and smoking cigarettes, because they're up at 4:30 in the morning rowing like you'd never seen before.
Yeah.
But that's been true for people in football, soccer, tennis, you name it. I think sports are tremendously important, as long as they're not abused. But anything can be abused. The key is doing it in moderation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think meditation. I've participated in meditation for close to 50 years, and I studied with a teacher in India, and learning to develop what we call one-pointedness, concentration, has been very helpful for me in other areas of my life. I used drugs when I was about 18, 19. I was at Woodstock, where everybody used drugs. I mean, drugs were part of a whole search for an altered state of consciousness.
Right.
But I came to realize, especially through learning meditation techniques and going through therapy, that I was doing something to myself that was the exact opposite of what I wanted. In other words, drugs cloud up my thinking and weakened my will. And I wanted to develop a strong will, an iron will. And through meditation and different disciplines, I found out that I could be much happier. And again, I would encourage people to find something that they like, a hobby, a sport, a community, where they have social support and can develop a clear thinking. Those are the things that I think are the best antidotes to drug problems.
Yeah, because any behavior, well, what we would consider a negative developed behavior,
right?
If someone can develop that on their own versus, some outside force, then that means that you can correct it on your own the same way you developed it.
Exactly.
Just, by changing the way you think, or changing the environment, which sometimes can be hard for people, depending on their living arrangement or their living situation, or whatever their respective environment is. But just a change or a shift in perspective, or a change or a shift in perception of the environment.
Exactly. I completely agree with you. Right. If I could just add one thing, it's a criticism of some forms of Zen and Buddhism, which I identify with Buddhism in many, many ways, especially what are called the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. However, I object to the idea that people should practice detachment. You can't practice detachment without attaching yourself to something else. For example, if I say to you, and I do this with clients, how do you stop sitting? There's only one way, and that's by standing up.
Standing up, right.
You have to do something different.
Yeah.
You can't just focus on stop sitting, stop sitting.
Yeah.
It's futile. You have to transfer your attachments from something negative and destructive to something much more positive and constructive. That's a key issue, I think. And that's the message of most mystical and meditation traditions in yoga, martial arts. But some of them just focus on detach yourself from the world, and you just can't do that. It's an impossible task. Find something positive. That's why when people get into trouble with drugs, you can't just stop using drugs. You've got to do something different.
Yeah.
That's constructive. And I think sports or going to school or whatever it is, Kennon, as long as it's something that enhances your sense of community and purpose in life, it's good.
Or because all voids have to be filled. So when you get rid of this bad thing that's been taking you down this road, you have to replace it with something that will take you so where you can carve out a new path for yourself.
I completely agree. I agree with that.
And you mentioned real quick, you mentioned Woodstock and the whole aspect of that, and how drugs were pretty accessible to anybody that wanted to change their change their state of mind or alter it. What's the guy's name? I think his name was Leary, if I'm not mistaken.
Timothy Leary.
Timothy Leary.
Turn in, turn on, and drop out. That's what his. Yeah.
He was, I guess he would be considered someone that was ahead of his time. I guess he looked at LSD and other drugs and said that if used in a certain way or used, you can use it as a positive, I guess.
Yes.
I think that was his argument, that LSD doesn't have to be so criminally stigmatized.
Right.
And I think there's still some research today that points to some positives of LSD, versus it being, I think it's still considered a Schedule I narcotic, federally.
Yeah, but scientifically, it's not a narcotic. It's a psychedelic drug.
Psychedelic.
Yeah. The thing, I took LSD. I have no problem saying it. I was part of the culture that was in search of a different consciousness. And I have told my students that there are basically two things that I learned from LSD and those very strong drugs. And LSD is a very, very strong drug. Mm. One is that there was a completely different way of perceiving myself and the world that I didn't know anything about. And it was radical. I mean, it was really something.
Yeah.
The second part that was meaningful to me was that I realized I had a very strong sense of self, and much stronger than I realized. Now, we used to discuss this in class all the time, because I would say, after I learned that, I didn't need to take it again. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, what's wrong with taking it? And I said, well, if you're not learning the lesson, if you have to keep repeating it over and over and over again. Once you learn that there's a different way of perceiving yourself in the world, let the clutch out and do something constructive with that realization.
Yeah.
And also, many people, their sense of self is not that strong. And LSD can really screw them up, because they can believe that they're completely crazy and can do things that they simply cannot do. For example, fly. They'll jump off the top of a building and try to fly. I mean, we all know what happens there. So, you can do dangerous things to yourself and others. You can misperceive and be in dramatic error about what reality is. Yeah. So I think that's a bad thing about using those drugs. But I did learn something from it. Mm-hmm. And they have been a part of religious traditions for many, many years. We used to read books by a guy named Carlos Castaneda, and it was called the Don Juan books, about an imaginary medicine man who advocated taking peyote and experiencing an alternate reality. And this was presented in kind of a cool movie called Altered States with William Hurt. They tried to copy this concept that Castaneda talked about, which was fantasy, but it was a very intriguing story. I would caution people to be careful about taking some of these drugs, because you may get yourself into trouble. I'm not saying addiction trouble. Yeah. I'm saying you misperceive reality and get into very dangerous situations. So I don't advocate it. All I'm saying is that there can be positive parts of it. I learned something positive. I learned that there was a very different way of perceiving myself and the world. And once I learned that, I didn't need to take it again. I acted on it.
Yeah.
And what I did was pursued meditation and philosophy as a way of experiencing different perception of the world and myself. And I was right. It was a good thing. And I can improve the quality of my life as a result. But I really didn't improve the quality of my life by taking LSD and some of those other psychedelics more than once or twice. Mm-hmm. And that's also why I gave up marijuana. I didn't like it. I know many people think it's a great thing, and it's probably not that different if you're doing it like drinking alcohol each evening.
Yeah.
I don't drink anymore, but I certainly enjoyed wine and a good mixed drink at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And it's all a matter of how you use alcohol, how you use marijuana.
Yeah.
That's important, not the substance itself and not your physiology itself.
how you specifically would use it,
Right.
or to what intention are you using it?
Exactly, because as you know, and I think we talked about this before, there's no such thing as an addict, as if all people are the same. People use drugs for different reasons, in different ways, with different consequences.
Yeah.
So if they want help stopping the drug use, then they need to look at diverse forms of help. There's not one size fits all.
Right.
And actually, it was CCHR, I believe, or another group that gave me an award for assisting in the establishment of alternative secular self-help groups.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, AA was not the only way. And there are different types of programs that people need to learn about. One of them, which I helped to start, is called Smart Recovery. You can find it on the internet. It's free, and it's based in cognitive behavioral principles of behavior change. It's very good, and it's been growing since we started it years ago. Anybody can find it on the internet, and there are meetings all over the world now. So when I helped to start that, I made sure that it was included in the literature that people can control their behavior with alcohol and drugs, that abstinence was not the only way of helping people control their behavior. For example, in many countries in the United Kingdom and in Europe, they teach what are called controlled drinking programs, which are just as effective as abstinence-oriented programs.
Okay.
But a lot of people won't stay with AA because they don't want to give up alcohol for the rest of their life.
Right.
And they don't have to, right?
That's right. I've known a few people that have gone to Alcoholics Anonymous in the past, and the result is that they're fearful of alcohol.
Right.
They become fearful of it because of whatever the change in mindset that Alcoholics Anonymous rendered for them.
Right.
They become fearful.
I think AA can be very useful. I have some of my best friends are in AA. I just talked to one just yesterday. He and I grew up together, and he said, Jeff, I just made it past my 41st year of being alcohol free through AA. And I said, that's absolutely fantastic, Bill. He's probably going to watch this show. But there are other programs like SMART that teach people that they don't have a disease, that they can control their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've debated many people at AA, and some of them will say, look, Dr. Schaler, your higher power can be anything you want it to be. And I say, yes. However, there's one thing it can't be. And they say, what's that? And I say, it can't be yourself.
Right.
You can't be in control of your behavior. And I said, that's a big mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we want to teach people that they're responsible for their behavior.
Right. I mean, this is the only body that we can control outright. So
right.
Why should we have the notion that we can't control it?
Exactly. But look at the message that's in politicians' minds all the time. It just drives me nuts.
Yeah.
They constantly play the blame game.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whether they're Democrats or Republicans or whatever. It's
yeah.
their fault. It's their fault.
Yeah.
That's the wrong message to be teaching people.
It's the very wrong message. And we see that it creates the division that we see now
right.
in general society, because even they know that this confusion creates a psychological damage, if you will, over time, believing that the politician is our answer to sovereignty.
Right.
Sovereignty. The power of the vote is our answer to sovereignty. And we see that hasn't worked for us. No matter what side you're on.
I think, unfortunately, we're living in a very scary time now with all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories and blaming and lying by politicians. I mean, it's, as you know, it's terrible. And in my talking with my granddaughters and their friends, they're scared.
Yeah.
They are scared.
Yeah.
Because they think that we are living in crazy times.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
very concerned about climate control and the environment. Fortunately, most of them are not turning to drugs, but they don't know what to do in terms of feeling good about themselves and feeling strong. And therapy is not always the answer, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are many things that people can do that are even more effective than therapy.
Therapy is just one avenue
Right.
that can be taken. Another avenue, like you said, sports or some form of physical activity,
Right.
that can be very therapeutic. Music can be very therapeutic.
Right.
For having myself having a music production background, I know firsthand that music is therapeutic.
Right.
Some people go and do what's called sound therapy, or some kind of light therapy, and looking at different colors. And there's so many different ways that we as human beings can heal ourselves, versus being caught in what we call the matrix, because the powers that control all this stuff, they understand how pliable the human mind is.
Exactly. I'm glad you mentioned The Matrix. I love that movie. It's a great metaphor.
Absolutely.
But, one of the things that people don't realize is that we don't need to have a lot of money to avail ourselves of these means for helping ourselves.
Yeah.
You don't have to be rich to go into therapy. You don't have to have a good insurance policy. There are plenty of self-help programs and sports and organizations that don't cost much at all.
And there are many people I've seen that are so dependent on their insurance. I'm not going to go to therapy unless my insurance covers it.
Right.
Because I don't want to take the responsibility of coming out of my own pocket to help to pay for my own healing.
That's a very important point. I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, I've been in private practice since 1975, and I've never used insurance to get paid. People pay out of their pockets. I've always offered a reduction in fee according to people's ability to pay, but I can only do so much of that because I got to pay my rent and everything else.
That's right. That's right.
To the extent that I can help some people, I'm perfectly willing to do that.
And one thing that I've noticed is that the people that are so reliant on their insurance company, those are the people that take forever to heal. I mean, they go to their psychologist or psychiatrist for 10, 15, 20 years, and they're still not healed.
Right.
They're depending on the insurance, their job, to help to flip the bill and put half of the responsibility or pass the buck over to them. So they don't have to take complete and 100% responsibility for their life journey.
And you remember what Truman said. You probably don't remember because you're much younger than I am, but he had a saying on his desk: "The buck stops here."
Right.
No more blame.
That's right.
No more blame.
The buck stops with you.
Right.
The buck stops with you.
Right. We need to have that sign out much more now.
Yes. Dr. Schaler, tell the people how they can get in contact with you.
Sure. Well, I'm on the internet. One of my friends created a Wikipedia page for me. You just put in Schaler, Schaler. You can find my website. You can find the Wikipedia page, and any information you need to get a hold of me is there.
And I'll put all that information up on the screen in post-production, so everyone can know exactly where to go. I've been to your website. There's a ton of information there.
Right.
Some people might say it's too much. It's like, oh gosh, it's so much. But this is some years of experience, and it's a lot of great stuff there. Dr. Schaler, thank you so much for being my guest here on the Kinetic Hour. I know we had some miscommunications before all of this, so I'm glad that we got it together. So I
didn't understand the junk mail drawer. Thanks to you. You helped me find the letter. So
it's all good.
It's an honor to be on your show, Kennon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want you to come back at some point, and because we can have these discussions on and on. We can go on for another hour and a half.
Of course.
Before we go off, when we get off, can you stick around just for a couple of minutes when we go off the air?
Sure.
So for everybody listening and watching, I want to thank you all for tuning in to the Kinetic Hour. Again, make sure you go to my YouTube channels, the Kinetic Hour. That's Kinetic, Kennetic. The Kinetic Hour, and this show will be going up on there really soon. And also Kinetic Fit and Wellness Info. There's a ton of information there about physical health, mental health, ways of healing that are not so invasive. All of us can heal ourselves through the power of our own minds. That's why they were given to us. We were ordained with all of this stuff that we can heal our own selves. If we can become addicted to something, we can kind of retract ourselves from the addiction. So go to my YouTube channels. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.